A single laugh. That's all it took to ground an entire airline. At Chicago O'Hare, Robert Caldwell, a man whose ambition was only outmatched by his arrogance, chose the wrong family to make an example of. He saw Dr. Hayden Monroe, a quiet, unassuming black man, with his family standing in the first-class line, and decided they didn't belong. Caldwell's mocking laughter echoed in the sterile terminal, a sound of pure contempt. He had no idea he wasn't just insulting a passenger. He was mocking the very architect of his airline's global operations. In a few short hours, that laugh would curdle into a scream of professional ruin as every single one of his company's planes was pulled from the sky, all because of a single meticulously worded email that would unravel an empire of hubris. This is the story of how quiet dignity toppled a titan of industry. The air in Terminal 5 of Chicago O'Hare International Airport hummed with the controlled chaos of 1,000 different journeys beginning or ending. It was a symphony of rolling suitcases, muffled announcements, and the low thrum of human anticipation. For the Monroe family, it was the overture to a long-awaited masterpiece, a 2-week European vacation, starting with a direct first-class flight to London on Global Wings Airlines. Dr. Hayden Monroe stood with a placid expression, a stark contrast to the quiet excitement bubbling within him. He was a man accustomed to observing complex systems, finding solace in logic and order. At 42, he had the reserved demeanor of a scholar, but the keen, observant eyes of a man who missed nothing. His work as a lead architect in aerospace logistics software demanded precision, and he applied the same meticulous care to his family life. This trip was the culmination of a year's planning a reward for his wife's recent promotion and a chance to show his children the world beyond their manicured suburban life. His wife, Dr. Lucia Monroe, a respected pediatrician, whose warmth could calm the most terrified child, stood beside him adjusting their 8-year-old daughter, Zoe's backpack. Lucia's energy was the vibrant counterpoint to Hayden's calm. She was the family's heart, and right now her heart was soaring. "Can you believe it, sweetie?" she whispered to Zoe. "We're going to see a real castle." Zoe bounced on the balls of her feet, her eyes wide. "And the big clock. The one that goes bong." "That's the one," Hayden chuckled, his gaze softening as he looked at her. Their 15-year-old son Jordan stood slightly apart, feigning teenage disinterest, while sneaking glances at the massive 777 visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was a mirror of his father in many ways, analytical sharp, and already a gifted coder, but he possessed his mother's fiery sense of justice. They were next in the dedicated first-class check-in line. The agent, a young woman named Brenda, smiled apologetically. "I'm so sorry, folks, the system seems to be lagging. It's not accepting my overrides. Let me get my station manager." She spoke into her shoulder microphone, and a few moments later, a man strode towards the counter with an air of beleaguered importance. He was in his late 40s, his uniform immaculately pressed, his thinning hair slicked back. A name tag on his breast pocket read, "Robert Caldwell, Station Manager." Caldwell didn't look at the Monroes. His eyes were fixed on the monitor. His lips curled into a slight sneer, as if the computer had personally offended him. "What is it now, Brenda?" These antique terminals couldn't handle a calculator's workload. "It's frozen on the seat assignment screen for the Monroe party." "Mr. Caldwell," she explained, her voice nervous. "I've tried rebooting the local client, but it's not responding." Caldwell sighed dramatically, a performance for the other agents. He tapped a few keys with aggressive, impatient stabs. Nothing. He then, for the first time, glanced at the family, waiting patiently. His eyes swept over them. Hayden in his tailored travel blazer, Lucia in her elegant but comfortable pantsuit, the well-behaved children. It was a quick, dismissive appraisal, the kind one gives to a piece of furniture that is out of place. His gaze lingered on Hayden for a fraction of a second too long, a flicker of something ugly and assessing in his eyes. He turned to the other agent at the next counter, a man named Gary, and leaned in, lowering his voice to a stage whisper that was perfectly audible. "Probably maxed out the credit card to get these seats," he murmured, a smirk playing on his lips. System probably had a shock trying to process it. Gary chuckled nervously, avoiding eye contact with the Monroes. The comment landed in the air between them, sharp and cold. Lucia's spine stiffened. Hayden's calm expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. Jordan's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing with a look of pure fury. Caldwell, emboldened by the lack of an immediate confrontation, turned his attention back to the screen. He banged the side of the monitor with the heel of his hand. "Come on, you piece of junk." He looked back at Hayden, not as a customer, but as a nuisance. "Look, I don't know what to tell you. The system's down. You'll have to step aside and wait." "Wait for how long?" Hayden asked, his voice even and low, betraying none of the anger simmering beneath the surface. "Our flight boards in 45 minutes. Caldwell let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor, filled with condescension. He looked at Gary again, this time making no effort to hide his disdain. "He's worried about boarding. That's cute." He then turned his full sneering attention on Hayden. "Sir, the entire first-class cabin is waiting for this terminal to work. You are not a special case. Now please step aside so my agent can process other passengers on a different system. But this is the dedicated first-class counter." Lucia interjected, her voice tight with disbelief and anger. "And that comment you made was completely out of line." Caldwell's mask of strained professionalism dropped, entirely replaced by a wall of arrogance. He looked Lucia up and down. "Ma'am, I am trying to solve a technical issue. My comments are the least of your problems right now. My problem is this computer. Your problem is that you're holding up the line." He then delivered the final, most venomous blow. He leaned towards Brenda, the junior agent, and said in a voice dripping with mock pity, "You gotta love it. Some people win the lottery and think it makes them royalty." And then he laughed. It was a full, throaty laugh shared with Gary, who joined in more hesitantly. It was the sound of gatekeeping, of prejudice-given voice. It echoed in the cavernous terminal, a clear, ringing announcement that the Monroe family, in the eyes of this man, was an anomaly, a curiosity to be mocked, not a customer to be served. Hayden met Caldwell's gaze. For a long, silent moment, the quiet engineer and the arrogant manager locked eyes. Hayden's face was unreadable, a mask of deep, impenetrable calm. But behind his eyes, the complex systems he understood so well were beginning to churn. He saw the flawed logic, the critical error in the human code standing before him. He saw a system that was about to experience a catastrophic failure. Without another word, Hayden took Lucia's arm gently. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's go." "Hayden." "No." Lucia hissed, her eyes flashing. "He's not going to get away with that. Not now, Lucia. Not here." Hayden insisted, his voice firm but low. He steered his family away from the counter, away from the snickering and the judgment. As they walked away, Robert Caldwell watched them go, a triumphant smirk on his face. He had put them in their place. He turned back to the terminal, feeling powerful in control. He was the manager of this station, a king in his small metallic kingdom. He had no way of knowing that he hadn't just insulted a family. He had triggered a protocol in a system far more complex and ruthless than his airline's booking software. He had just personally initiated his own professional termination sequence. The echo of his laughter was still fading, but the countdown had already begun. The sterile ambience of the Global Wings Polaris Lounge was meant to be an oasis of calm, a hushed sanctuary from the airport's frantic energy. For the Monroes, it felt like a gilded cage. They found a secluded corner, the plush leather seats offering no comfort for their frayed nerves. Zoe, sensing the tension, was uncharacteristically quiet. Her excitement for castles and clocks replaced by a worried frown. Jordan was vibrating with a silent teenage rage, furiously tapping on his phone, likely venting to his friends. Lucia paced in the small space, her movements sharp and angry. "I cannot believe you just walked away, Hayden. You let him win. You let him humiliate us in front of our children." Winning would not have been yelling at him in front of a terminal full of people. Hayden replied, his voice still unnervingly calm. He was looking at his laptop, his fingers poised over the keyboard, but his attention was fully on his wife. What would that have accomplished, Lucia? A scene security escorts us away, and he gets to play the victim to his bosses. We miss our flight, our vacation is ruined, and he gets a slap on the wrist, if that. He wanted a reaction. I refused to give it to him. "So we do nothing," she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "We just swallow that poison." He laughed at us, Hayden. He implied we were poor, that we didn't belong. He looked at you like you were something he'd scraped off his shoe. "No," Hayden said, finally, looking up from his screen. His eyes were hard, not with anger, but with a cold, focused intensity that Lucia recognized. It was the look he got when he was deep in a problem, untangling a knot of code that no one else could solve. "We don't do nothing. We do something smart. We do something permanent." He turned his laptop towards her. On the screen was a blank email draft. "Yelling is temporary. A formal complaint properly filed and directed is forever. It's data. It's a permanent record of his failure." Jordan scoffed from his seat. "A complaint form, Dad, that'll go to some HR bot that will send back an automated apology and a voucher for $50. That's not justice." "You're right, son," Hayden agreed, surprising him. "A standard complaint would. But this won't be a standard complaint." He began to type. His fingers moved with a speed and certainty that was almost hypnotic. He didn't write with emotion. He wrote like an engineer documenting a critical system failure. To Frank. Dawson at globalwingscorporate.net. Seavale at Global Wings Corporate. Net CCGWA Incident Response Internal at Global Wings Corporate. Net. Subject Formal Complaint and System Integrity. Flag Station Manager Robert Caldwell. ORD Flight GW712 LHR. August 31st, 2025. 04:15 a.m. CST. He detailed the events with surgical precision. He listed the time, the flight number, the names of the employees involved. He quoted Robert Caldwell's words verbatim. Probably maxed out the credit card. Some people win the lottery and think it makes them royalty. He didn't describe them as racist or insulting. He simply listed them as unprofessional remarks made in the presence of customers and junior staff. He was building a case brick by factual brick. Then the email took a turn. Beyond the unprofessional conduct, I must report a significant operational concern. The initial issue was a terminal freeze-up at the first-class check-in counter. Counter 4B, Terminal 5, Station Manager Caldwell was unable to resolve the issue and responded by striking the hardware and dismissing the fault. My professional assessment, based on the non-responsiveness of the local client, despite a functioning network connection indicated by other terminals processing passengers, suggests a potential server-side handshake failure or a memory leak in the client application specifically related to the seat assignment module when accessing PNRs with complex ticketing structures. Lucia read the words over his shoulder, her anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by curiosity. "What are you doing, Hayden?" "I'm speaking a language they can't ignore," he said softly. He continued typing. "The system in question, the Global Wings logistics platform, is one I am intimately familiar with. Such a freeze, while seemingly minor, can be an early indicator of cascading failures within the network, especially if it involves database access timeouts. A manager dismissing such an anomaly without filing a proper IT incident report is a serious breach of protocol and a potential threat to operational stability. His focus was on disparaging my family rather than addressing a legitimate technical red flag. He paused, his finger hovering over the mouse, and now he whispered the payload. He attached a small encrypted file to the email. It was a diagnostic log he had discreetly pulled from the airport's public Wi-Fi network a few minutes ago. While waiting for the lounge, he had, out of professional habit and a surge of adrenaline, run a quick network analysis. He had noticed that the Global Wings internal network was broadcasting error packets at an unusually high rate. It was a tiny crack in the foundation, something 99.9% of people would never see. But to him, it was a glaring red light. He concluded the email. "I trust you will address both the personnel issue and the operational issue with the urgency they require. The safety and integrity of your airline's operations should be paramount. Mr. Caldwell's behavior today suggests they are not. Regards, Dr. Hayden Monroe." Passenger PNR 7G8FH3 and former lead architect Project Aether. Lucia's breath hitched. She stared at the last line. "Hayden, you didn't." "I did," he said, his face grim. "He thought I was a lottery winner. He's about to find out I helped build the casino." He hit send. The email disappeared from the screen, a digital ghost sent hurtling towards the nerve center of Global Wings. For a moment, the only sound was the quiet hum of the lounge's air conditioning. Jordan looked at his father, his earlier cynicism gone, replaced by a look of awe. "Who are Frank Dawson and C?" "Vale." "Frank Dawson is the global head of IT security," Hayden explained, closing the laptop. "He was my main point of contact when we integrated the system. He knows exactly who I am and that I don't exaggerate. Catherine Vale is the Executive Vice President of North American Operations. She's Frank's boss's boss. She's a ruthless operator who cares about two things: on-time performance and shareholder value. A rogue manager creating legal liability and ignoring system warnings threatens both." He leaned back, the tension finally beginning to leave his shoulders. He had done what he did best. He hadn't engaged in a shouting match. He had found the critical vulnerability in the system and written a piece of code, in this case, an email that would exploit it. "Now," he said, his voice softening as he turned to Zoe, "we wait. And while we wait, who wants to hear more about the Tower of London?" He was trying to salvage the vacation, to pull his family back from the precipice of a ruined day. But he knew, with the certainty of an engineer who has just pushed a critical update to a live server, that things were now in motion. He hadn't just filed a complaint. He had lit a fuse, and the only question now was how big the explosion would be. 23 floors above the bustling streets of downtown Chicago, in the sterile, climate-controlled quiet of the Global Wings corporate headquarters, Frank Dawson was on his third cup of coffee. At 5:15 a.m., the Network Operations Center, NOC, was a sea of glowing monitors, a cathedral of data where he served as high priest. His job was to protect the airline's digital nervous system, the sprawling, impossibly complex creation known as the Aether platform. His phone buzzed with a high-priority notification, an email. He glanced at the sender, Dr. Hayden Munro. Frank's blood ran cold. He sat bolt upright, the coffee forgotten. The name was a ghost from 5 years ago. Hayden Munro wasn't just a former contractor. He was a legend in the company's IT division. He was the genius they'd brought in from a top aerospace firm to design the very heart of Aether. The man knew the system's architecture better than Frank did. He knew where all the digital bodies were buried because he had designed the cemetery. An email from Hayden Munro at this hour sent to him, and Catherine Vale was the equivalent of a nuclear launch warning. He opened the email, his eyes scanning the text with mounting dread. He read the subject line, formal complaint and system integrity flag. His stomach tightened. This was bad. He read through the account of the interaction with a station manager named Robert Caldwell. It was galling, but it was the technical details that made the hairs on his arm stand up. Potential server-side handshake failure. Memory leak in the client application. Indicator of cascading failures. Intimately familiar with the Global Wings Aether logistics platform. Frank felt a knot of pure ice form in his gut. Munro wasn't just guessing, he was diagnosing. From a public lounge. He then saw the attachment, a small encrypted diagnostic log. He quickly downloaded and decrypted it. His screen filled with raw data. A torrent of error packets he recognized instantly. They were from the sync protocol that linked the passenger check-in system with the central load balancing database. It was a quiet part of the system, one that was supposed to be robust. The errors were minor, but they were persistent, and as Hayden had noted, growing. The final line of the email hit him like a physical blow. Former lead architect project Aether. "Oh, you stupid, stupid man," Frank whispered to the empty room, referring to Robert Caldwell. He knew immediately that this was no longer an HR issue about a rude employee. This was an operational crisis. Hayden Munro would never ever cry wolf. If he sent up a flare, it was because the ship was already on fire. The rudeness of the manager was simply the ignition source that had drawn the architect's attention back to his creation. Frank didn't hesitate. He bypassed 4 levels of middle management and patched himself directly into the private video line of Catherine Vale. Catherine Vale was a formidable woman in her late 50s who ran her division with the efficiency of a military general. She was already in her office, a Spartan glass-walled room with a commanding view of the city. She answered the call on the second ring, her expression impatient. "This had better be a 5-alarm fire, Frank." "It is," Frank said, his voice grim. He forwarded her the email. "Read this, now. It's from Hayden Munro." Catherine's eyes narrowed at the name. She remembered the budget overruns and the sheer brilliance of the man who had cost her company a fortune, but had delivered a system that was a decade ahead of its rivals. She read the email in silence, her expression hardening with every word. When she got to the technical analysis, she looked up at Frank, her eyes cold as steel. "Is he right?" she asked. Her voice was flat, betraying no emotion. "The log he attached is legitimate." Frank confirmed, his voice shaky. "He's seeing early-stage data corruption in the PNR to manifest sync. It's a low-level error that our automated diagnostics would have missed for another 12, maybe 24 hours. We're running a deep-level scan now, but... Yes, I think he's right. The glitch that manager saw wasn't a random freeze. It was a symptom." Catherine was silent for a full 10 seconds. In her mind, a dozen catastrophic scenarios were playing out. A corrupted manifest could mean an improperly balanced aircraft. A failed data sync could lead to ticketing and security mismatches. A system-wide failure during peak hours could cost the company hundreds of millions of dollars and create a PR nightmare that would last for years. All because a station manager in Chicago couldn't keep his mouth shut. "This Caldwell," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Tell me about him," Frank typed furiously. "Robert Caldwell. Station manager O'Hare. 15 years with the company. Multiple complaints on his record for customer belligerence, all of them dismissed by his direct supervisor as personality conflicts. He's been passed over for promotion 3 times. In other words, a mediocre employee with a history of arrogance and a chip on his shoulder. The exact kind of person to make a colossal company-threatening mistake. He's a liability, Catherine stated. It was not a question. It was a verdict. But he's secondary. Frank, what's the status of the deep scan? As she spoke, a red alert began to flash on one of Frank's monitors. A klaxon, muted but insistent, began to sound in the NOC. Frank's face went pale. "Oh my God. Catherine, it's worse." The memory leak, Monroe predicted. It's not isolated to the check-in client. It's in the core scheduling module. The data corruption isn't just happening. It's replicating. Every time a new flight plan is filed or a crew is assigned, the error is being written and rewritten across the entire network. In English, Frank, Catherine snapped. "We're flying blitter," he said, his voice cracking with the enormity of it. "We think our planes are balanced and fueled correctly, that our crews are certified for the right aircraft, that our passenger lists are accurate. But the data is being compromised. We can't trust it. We can't trust any of it." Catherine, Vale, the woman who had weathered fuel crisis union strikes and a volcanic ash cloud that had shut down the Atlantic, felt a genuine wave of fear. This was the new face of terror. Not a bomb, but a bug. A single replicating error that could bring the entire airline to its knees. And the only person who had seen it coming was the man her manager had just laughed out of a check-in line. "What's the protocol?" she asked, her voice a low command. Frank swallowed hard. He knew what the answer was, but he dreaded saying it. It was the doomsday scenario they had trained for, but never believed they would have to execute. "The protocol is called Ether Fall," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We have to take the entire system offline. Every plane, every flight, every single operation that relies on the Aether platform has to be grounded. Immediately. Until we can patch the core and purge the corrupted data, we can't safely fly a single aircraft." Catherine stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. "Ground the whole fleet on one of the busiest travel weekends of the year. The financial and logistical fallout would be apocalyptic. But the alternative, a potential catastrophe in the air, was unthinkable. She closed her eyes for a single second, a silent curse passing her lips. Then she opened them, her decision made. "Execute it," she commanded. "Ground them all. Now." The order, when it came, was swift and absolute. It cascaded down from Catherine Vale's office through the corporate hierarchy with the force of a tidal wave. The command was simple and terrifying: initiate ether fall. All Global Wings flights worldwide are grounded effective immediately. No exceptions. For pilots on tarmacs from Tokyo to Toronto, it meant an abrupt instruction from the control tower to power down their engines. For gate agents from Sydney to San Francisco, it meant their screens suddenly flashing a red, ominous message. System lockout. All departures suspended. For the thousands of Global Wings employees worldwide, it was a moment of sheer, unadulterated chaos. But at Chicago, O'Hare's Terminal 5, Robert Caldwell was still basking in the glow of his perceived victory. He had successfully processed the rest of the first-class passengers on a different terminal, and was now striding through the concourse, his chest puffed out. He saw the Monroe family seated near their departure gate, looking subdued. He caught Jordan's eye and gave the boy a slight, condescending smirk before moving on. He felt a rush of satisfaction. He was the authority here. He made the rules. The first sign that his world was about to shatter came not as a bang, but as a collective confused murmur from the passengers around him. Phones began to buzz in unison. A ripple of anxiety spread through the terminal as people looked at their screens, their faces contorting in disbelief. Then the official announcement crackled over the PA system. A female voice, strained and robotic, delivering an impossible message. "Attention all passengers traveling on Global Wings Airlines. Due to an unforeseen, system-wide technical issue, all Global Wings flights, both domestic and international, have been grounded until further notice. We repeat, all flights are grounded." The terminal erupted. A wave of groans, shouts, and panicked questions crashed against the walls. People surged towards the gate counters, demanding answers that the bewildered agents didn't have. Caldwell stood frozen in the middle of the concourse, the announcement washing over him. System-wide technical issue. His mind flashed back to the frozen terminal, the one he had struck with his hand. He felt a small, cold prickle of unease, but quickly dismissed it. It was a coincidence. This was some massive server failure in Chicago, nothing to do with him. In fact, this was his time to shine. A crisis was a manager's opportunity to demonstrate leadership. He squared his shoulders and marched towards the nearest gate, preparing to calm the growing mob. "All right, people, let's have some order," he began, his voice booming with authority. "We are experiencing a network outage. Your patience is appreciated." His phone rang a shrill, insistent tone. He looked at the caller ID Catherine Vale, EVP OPS. His heart leaped. The executive vice president herself. She was probably calling him the man on the ground at their biggest hub to get a handle on the situation. This was it. This was his chance to impress the top brass. He answered his voice, a model of calm professionalism. "Caldwell here. Stay where you are." The voice on the other end. Ted. It was cold, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. This was not the call he had expected. "Vale, the situation on the ground is becoming tense, but I have it under." "You have nothing." "Caldwell," she cut in her voice, like chipping ice. "You are to remain at gate C19. Do not speak to any more passengers. Do not speak to any staff. Do not touch any more equipment. A corporate security team is on their way to you. Is that understood?" The line went dead. Robert Caldwell stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, his face paling. Corporate security. That made no sense. Why would they send security for a network outage? The prickle of unease he'd felt earlier returned this time as a full-blown spear of ice plunging into his stomach. He looked around the chaotic terminal, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a king. He felt like a target. He saw them before they saw him. Two men and a woman all dressed in sharp, dark business suits that were completely out of place in the airport environment. They moved through the frantic crowd with an unnerving purpose, their eyes scanning the area. Their lead, a tall man with graying temples and a face that looked like it was carved from granite, zeroed in on him. They approached, their expressions grim. The lead man, who introduced himself as Mr. Peterson from Corporate Risk Management, didn't offer a handshake. Robert Caldwell Peterson asked, though it was clear from his tone it wasn't a question. "Yes," Caldwell stammered. "What is this about? I was just on the phone with Miss Vale." "We know," Peterson said, cutting him off. "You are to come with us. Now." "Where are we going?" Caldwell asked, his voice trembling slightly as a crowd began to form their anger at the flight cancellations, now shifting to curiosity about the unfolding drama. "We are going to an office where you will surrender your company ID, your laptop, and your phone. You will then be escorted from the premises," Peterson stated flatly. "Your employment with Global Wings Airlines is terminated effective immediately." The words hit Caldwell with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step. Terminated. For what? For a system failure. That's insane. Peterson's eyes were devoid of any sympathy. "Your termination is for gross negligence, dereliction of duty, and a catastrophic failure of judgment that has directly led to this company-wide crisis." Caldwell's mind reeled. Directly led to... It couldn't be. The frozen screen, the family, the complaint he assumed they would file. It all clicked into place with a sickening, horrifying clarity. It wasn't a coincidence. The Monroe family. He whispered, his face ashen. "This is about them, isn't it?" Peterson's expression didn't change. "Dr. Monroe did this airline a great service today by reporting a critical system flaw that you, in your arrogance, chose to ignore. He also documented your unacceptable behavior, which has exposed this company to significant legal and reputational damage." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. "You didn't just laugh at a passenger, Mr. Caldwell. You laughed at the man who designed the entire platform you were supposed to be managing. You mocked the one person on this planet who could spot the crack in the foundation before the whole house came down." The crowd around them was growing, phones held up recording. Among the onlookers were Brenda and Gary, the two agents from the check-in counter. Their faces were a mixture of shock and a dawning, terrible understanding. Caldwell looked wildly around, his eyes landing on the Monroe family, who were watching the scene from a distance. He saw Hayden Monroe, his expression not of triumph, but of weary disappointment. He saw Lucia Monroe, her arms around her children, her face a mask of stern vindication. And he saw Jordan, the teenage son, looking directly at him with an unwavering, condemnatory gaze. In that moment, Robert Caldwell's entire world unraveled. His authority, his career, his pride, it all evaporated under the harsh, fluorescent lights of the terminal. He was no longer a king in his kingdom. He was just a man publicly stripped of everything the architect of his own spectacular demise. "This way, Mr. Caldwell," Peterson said, gesturing for him to walk. As the two security men flanked him and began to lead him through the gawking crowd, a single thought screamed through Robert Caldwell's mind. It was just a laugh. How could it all end over a single stupid laugh? While chaos reigned in the terminal, the Monroe family had been quietly escorted away by a different kind of airline employee. She was a woman in a crisp, unbranded suit who had appeared as if from nowhere, her voice low and apologetic. She had introduced herself as being from the Executive Response Office and had guided them through a series of anonymous corridors to a private suite in the attached airport hotel, a world away from the noise and fury they had just witnessed. The suite was luxurious and silent. A table was laden with food and drinks they hadn't asked for. Zoe, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster, had fallen asleep on a plush sofa. Jordan was silently staring out the window at the motionless sea of Global Wings aircraft parked at the gates of vast, grounded fleet. Hayden and Lucia sat together watching the news on a large television. Every channel was leading with the same story, the unprecedented global shutdown of Global Wings Airlines. Analysts were speculating wildly, citing everything from a massive cyber attack to corporate bankruptcy. The airline's stock was in freefall in after-hours trading. The financial cost was already being estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Hayden Lucia said, her voice barely a whisper. "Did you do this? Did your email do all of this?" Hayden ran a hand over his face, the picture of exhaustion. "I didn't. I couldn't have known the extent of it. I reported a bug, Lucia. A serious one, yes. And I reported a man who was a danger to his post. I thought they would pull him for an investigation, maybe delay a few flights while they ran a diagnostic. I never imagined this." He felt a heavy weight settling on him. He had acted to protect his family's dignity, and as it turned out, the airline's operational safety. But the sheer scale of the consequences was staggering. He hadn't wanted to bring a multi-billion-dollar corporation to its knees. He had just wanted one man to be held accountable for his bigotry. "He deserved it," Jordan said from the window, his voice quiet but firm. The man at the counter. He got what was coming to him. He whom. "Justice shouldn't cause this much chaos, Jordan," Hayden replied wearily. "This is affecting thousands of people. Employees, passengers. People just trying to get home." "It's not your fault," Hayden Lucia said, taking his hand. "It's his. If Caldwell had done his job, if he had listened to the young woman at the counter and escalated the IT issue, instead of making racist jokes, a technician would have looked at it, and none of this would have happened. He was the single point of failure. You just wrote the report." As she spoke, a phone that had been placed on the coffee table began to ring. It was a satellite phone, the kind used for secure, high-level communications. The woman from the executive office had simply said, "Someone will be in touch." Hayden looked at the phone, then at Lucia. He took a deep breath and answered it, putting it on speaker. "Hello, Dr. Monroe." The voice was female, crisp, and commanded authority. It was the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to without question. "This is Catherine Vale, Executive Vice President of North American Operations for Global Wings. I know who you are," Ms. Vale, Hayden said calmly. "Good," she replied. "Then let's dispense with the pleasantries. First, on behalf of the entire executive leadership of this company, I want to offer you and your family our most profound and sincere apology. What happened to you today was inexcusable. It does not represent our company's values, and the individual responsible is no longer in our employ." There was a pause. "I've seen his file, Dr. Monroe. I've seen the previous complaints. The failure here isn't just his. It's ours for allowing a man like that to hold a position of authority for so long. We are fixing that. I appreciate that," Ms. Vale Hayden said. "Second," she continued, her voice shifting from apologetic to sheer focused business, "I want to thank you. Your email, your flag on the system's integrity. You have in all likelihood saved this company from a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. The bug you identified was deeper and more virulent than our own systems detected. Had it gone unchecked for another day, the potential for data corruption could have led to a genuine safety-of-life event. You didn't just save us money, Dr. Monroe. You may well have saved lives." Hayden remained silent, letting the weight of her words sink in. He had been so focused on the insult, he hadn't fully comprehended the danger of the glitch. "We are in your debt," Catherine Vale stated. "A debt we intend to honor. We have, of course, fully refunded your tickets. We have also arranged for a private jet to take you and your family to London as soon as you are ready, and it will be at your disposal for the remainder of your European vacation. Furthermore, we are issuing your family lifetime first-class travel privileges on any Global Wings flight to any destination." Lucia's eyes widened. A private jet. Lifetime travel. It was an extraordinary offer. But Catherine Vale wasn't finished. "That is the compensation," she said. "But it's not why I'm calling. Dr. Monroe. We have a crisis. My technical team is the best in the business, but they are patching a system they didn't build. They're working in the dark. You, on the other hand, you designed the architecture. You know its strengths, and more importantly, you know its potential weaknesses." She paused, the unspoken question hanging in the air. "What are you asking, Ms. Vale?" Hayden asked, already knowing the answer. "I am asking for your help," she said, her voice stripped of all executive pretense, leaving only a raw, desperate plea. "I need you to come to our network operations center. We will pay any consulting fee you name. I need you to lead the team that will fix this. I need the architect to come back and save his creation." Hayden looked at Lucia, at his sleeping daughter, at his son, who was now staring at him with undisguised admiration. His vacation, the one he had planned for a year, was supposed to be starting now. He was supposed to be disconnecting from the world of logic code and cascading failures. But he also saw the bigger picture. The grounded planes, the stranded passengers, the system he had poured years of his life into now broken. And he felt a familiar, undeniable pull, the engineer's instinct, to solve the unsolvable problem. He thought of Robert Caldwell, a man who saw only the color of his skin and not the contents of his mind. The irony was staggering. The man Caldwell deemed unworthy of a first-class seat was now being asked to save the entire airline. The karma was no longer just about punishment. It was about a profound and undeniable form of poetic justice. "All right, Miss Vale," Hayden said, his voice firm and clear. "Send a car. I'm on my way." The Global Wings Network Operations Center, known internally as The Bridge, was a place Hayden Monroe knew intimately. He had spent hundreds of hours within its chilled, humming confines 5 years ago, overseeing the birth of the Ether platform. Returning now felt surreal, like visiting a home he had built that was now on fire. The atmosphere was one of organized panic. Dozens of the brightest IT minds in the country were hunched over workstations, their faces illuminated by scrolling lines of coup and angry red error messages. The massive central screen that usually displayed a majestic real-time map of global wings, flights across the globe, was now a static, mournful image of the company logo. Catherine Vale met him at the entrance. In person, she was even more formidable, projecting an aura of absolute control even in the midst of a meltdown. She shook his hand firmly. "Dr. Munro, thank you for coming," she said. "The team is yours, whatever you need. Access Resources coffee, you get it. Frank Dawson is leading the floor team." Frank, looking like he hadn't slept in a week, hurried over. "Hayden, I never thought I'd be so happy and so terrified to see you again." "Let's get to work, Frank," Hayden said, shrugging off his blazer. He was no longer a passenger or a victim. He was back in his element. For the next 8 hours, Hayden Munro conducted a masterclass in crisis management. He didn't just understand the code, he understood its philosophy. He moved from station to station, his presence instantly calming the frantic engineers. He didn't just give orders. He asked precise, insightful questions that cut through the noise and identified the core of the problem. He confirmed his initial hypothesis. A memory leak in a newly implemented third-party software update for seat assignments was causing a buffer overflow, which in turn was corrupting the primary scheduling database. The error was replicating with every automated cross-check. The system was in effect poisoning itself. "It's like a prion disease for data," he explained to Catherine, using an analogy he knew she would understand. "Misfolded proteins causing a chain reaction. We can't just patch the leak. We have to purge every corrupted file from the live servers and the backups, then force a full system restore from a clean snapshot taken before the update was pushed." "How long?" Catherine asked, her jaw tight. "The patch is the easy part. I've already written it," Hayden said, pointing to a screen where he had composed a block of elegant, efficient code. "The purge and restore, that's delicate. 24 hours if we're lucky, 36 if we're not. Every hour the airline was grounded cost them an estimated $10 million. Catherine did the math in her head and didn't flinch. "Do it." As the hours bled into one another, a strange camaraderie formed in the bridge. The engineers who had only known Hayden Munro as a name in their system's documentation now saw the legend in action. He was methodical, brilliant, and unflappable. He treated every member of the team, from senior programmers to junior technicians, with a quiet respect that stood in stark contrast to the arrogance that had caused the crisis. Meanwhile, the story was beginning to leak to the press. An anonymous source within the airline, likely a disgruntled employee who had witnessed the scene at O'Hare, had tipped off a major news network. The narrative was shifting. The story was no longer just about a technical failure. It was about the station manager whose racist behavior towards a passenger had inadvertently triggered the shutdown. And that passenger, the reports were beginning to clarify, was the very architect of the system that had failed. The news cycle exploded. The story was irresistible, a tale of hubris, incompetence, and incredible, poetic karma. Airline manager mocks tech genius grounds. Global Fleet read one headline. The man they laughed at, how one family's complaint exposed a corporate crisis, read another. Robert Caldwell became an overnight symbol of corporate arrogance and prejudice. His face was plastered everywhere. News vans were parked outside his suburban home. He was fired disgraced and now publicly pilloried. His career in the aviation industry, or any industry, was over. He had become a pariah, his name a shorthand for the kind of managerial malpractice that companies spend billions trying to avoid. The hard karma he had earned wasn't just the loss of his job. It was the complete and utter destruction of his reputation. Back in the bridge, Hayden remained oblivious to the media storm, his focus absolute. Finally, after 27 grueling hours, it was done. Frank Hayden said, his voice raspy with exhaustion. Initiate the final reboot sequence. Bring Aether back online. A tense silence fell over the room as Frank typed the command. For a full minute, the main screen remained blank. Then, with a soft chime, the Global Wings logo appeared, followed by the majestic world map. One by one, flight indicators began to populate the screen, blinking green. The system was clean. It was stable. It was alive. The room erupted in a wave of relieved applause and cheers. Engineers hugged each other, some crying with sheer exhaustion and relief. Hayden simply stood back and watched, a quiet, profound sense of satisfaction washing over him. He had faced the beast and tamed it. Catherine Vale approached him, her face etched with a fatigue that mirrored his own. But for the first time, he saw a genuine smile touch her lips. "Dr. Monroe," she said, her voice filled with a respect that bordered on awe. "I believe the correct term for your fee is a blank check. Name your price." Hayden thought for a moment. He thought about the humiliation, the anger, the ruined start to his vacation. He thought about the private jet and the lifetime of free flights. He could ask for millions, and they would pay it without blinking. "I have 2 conditions," Hayden said, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the celebratory noise. "First, my fee for the last 27 hours of consulting is $1. Catherine stared at him, stunned. $1? "Yes," Hayden said. "I didn't do this for the money. I did it because it was the right thing to do. My second condition, however, is not negotiable." He looked her directly in the eye. "I want you to use the money you would have paid me to establish a permanent company-wide training program, a mandatory program for every single employee, from the baggage handlers to the executive board. Call it the Monroe Initiative. It will focus on racial bias, de-escalation, and professional integrity. It will be run by leading experts, and its progress will be reported in your annual shareholder meeting." He paused, letting his demand sink in. "You had a cancer in your company, Ms. Vale. Robert Caldwell wasn't the disease. He was a symptom. I want you to cure the disease." Catherine Vale was speechless. She had expected a number with 7 or 8 figures. Instead, she had been handed a moral mandate. Hayden Monroe wasn't just fixing her software. He was demanding she fix her company's soul. She looked at this quiet, brilliant man who had weathered an ugly storm with nothing but dignity and intelligence. He had been given the power to demand almost anything, and he had chosen to demand that they become better. "Done," she said without hesitation. "It's done." 2 weeks later, the Monroe family was flying home. Not on a private jet. Hayden had politely declined, stating that his family was more than comfortable in first class, but on a commercial Global Wings flight from Rome. The trip had been salvaged and had been by all accounts magical. They had seen the Colosseum, explored the Louvre, and yes, Zoe had heard Big Ben chime. But something was different. The moment they had arrived at the airport in Rome, they were treated not just as first-class passengers, but as royalty. The new station manager, an Italian woman with a warm, genuine smile, had greeted them personally. "Dr. and Mrs. Monroe, it is an absolute honor to welcome you," she had said, and they knew she meant it. The flight attendants knew their names. The pilot came out of the cockpit before takeoff to shake Hayden's hand. "Thank you, sir," the pilot had said simply. "You did a good thing for all of us." The story had become a legend within the company. The tale of the architect and the manager was already being used as a case study in corporate training sessions. The Monroe Initiative was fast-tracked with a board of directors that included leading sociologists and civil rights leaders. The changes at Global Wings were not cosmetic. They were structural. Robert Caldwell, meanwhile, had disappeared from public life. After a torrent of legal threats from the airline for his gross negligence and facing potential lawsuits from shareholder groups, he had sold his house and moved to an unknown location, his name forever tarnished. His laughter, once a tool of derision, had become the echo of his own ruin. As their plane soared at 40,000 feet above the Atlantic, Hayden looked out the window at the endless blue horizon. Lucia leaned her head on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. "You've been quiet." "I'm fine," he said, a small smile on his face. "I was just thinking about systems, about how sometimes a single broken component can threaten the whole structure, and how sometimes all it takes to fix it is for someone to notice and file the right report." Zoe was asleep in her seat, a tiny model of the Tower of London clutched in her hand. Jordan was sitting across the aisle, not on his phone, but reading a book on advanced network theory. He occasionally glanced over at his father with a look of profound respect. The ugly incident at O'Hare had, in a strange way, brought their family closer bonded by the shared experience and the quiet victory they had won. They hadn't fought fire with fire. They hadn't stooped to Caldwell's level. They had won with intelligence, with dignity, and with the undeniable power of competence. Hayden Monroe had been judged by a man who saw only his skin, and in the end, he had been vindicated by the power of his mind. The karma that had unfolded was not loud or violent. It was precise, systemic, and absolute. It was the karma of a perfectly executed line of code. The flight attendant came by. "Dr. Monroe, can I get you anything at all?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine warmth. Hayden smiled. "No, thank you," he replied, looking at his family. "I have everything I need right here." He settled back into his seat, the hum of the engines a soothing reminder of a complex system working in perfect harmony, a harmony he had helped restore both in the air and on the ground. This story is a powerful reminder that the true measure of a person is not found in the volume of their voice, but in the depth of their character and the strength of their expertise. The Monroe family faced an ugly act of prejudice, but instead of responding with anger, they answered with intelligence and integrity. Dr. Hayden Monroe proved that the most effective weapon against arrogance is quiet competence. The hard karma that found Robert Caldwell wasn't magic. It was a direct consequence of his own actions, a bill for his bigotry that came due in the most spectacular way possible. It shows that in our interconnected world, you never truly know who you're talking to, and a little bit of respect goes a long way. If this story of karmic justice and quiet strength resonated with you, please hit the like button and share it with someone who appreciates a story where intellect triumphs over ignorance. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more tales of poetic justice and real-life consequences. What did you think of Hayden's decision at the end? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.